Good morning. My name is Marcy Strumgren, and you've tuned in to Just the Facts. I have in the studio today Natalie Zeleznikar, who ran for the House last September and won. And so I want to welcome her into the studio today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for running. And
It's my honor.
I do want to add this. She won by 31 votes. So,
33.
Oh, sorry.
33.
33. Thank you for that correction.
Yes.
33 votes.
Yes.
So don't ever think your vote doesn't count, because it does.
It truly does.
Natalie, you've had quite an interesting year down at the Capitol, haven't you?
Well, that's what I'm told. For those who have been serving longer than I have, they said it was like nothing they've ever seen before. So, you know, the beauty of being a first-time elected official is I have nothing to compare it to. I haven't been in politics before. It wasn't on my bucket list. It was on my bucket list to maybe run for county commissioner, but not for the state of Minnesota. So everything's new to me, and I'm energized learning and watching the process, but it was a very fast pace, and I think it was largely because we had a trifecta this year.
Would you explain what you mean? Your colleagues were, of course, aware of all of this. What do you mean by so different than in the past?
What I'm told by Democrats and constituents that visit the Capitol and Republicans, regardless of party, the pace, we had probably 4,000 bills introduced, and on day one we were already introducing bills on the floor and going into debate. And so the amount of bills that came to committee, and we really didn't have a lot of time for discussion, for talking through what were in the bills, what was being proposed. And the pace, it was just move it through, and then when we got to the end, then, you know, things are rolled together. Various bills that were passed or didn't pass are rolled together into the omnibus bills. So I think just the nature of not having enough time to really talk through. A lot of the people that had been there before on the Democrat side, I think, felt that these are ideas we've had for 10 years. It's not new ideas, we're going to roll with it. And they did. They rolled with it and rolled fast, but there were many people on the Democrat side and Republican side that were first-time elected officials. And that was a disservice, I think, to all the people coming in, because there wasn't committee time. And what I'm told is that there was a lot more time for conversation and testimony from the public, whether it was from nonprofits or businesses or constituents, to talk about the pros and cons before bills are going through committee.
So how many of those bills were innumerable number of pages that perhaps you even didn't have time to read through them, so you knew exactly what you're voting on?
I can tell you that for the freshman class that I was with, I would say we read everything. And I would say a lot of people did. You know, for a lot of people, they have probably seen the bill because it gets renumbered in a new year. So it's not new to them, but for all of us, that it was new to us. So I read every bill because I wanted to know what it was. It took a lot of time because the pace was coming so fast. And then it was moving through numerous committees to get to the House floor to vote, to then get to the Senate floor to vote. And then at the end, they went to conference committee.
Well, I know that there's a law stating that you're supposed to have one issue, and correct me if I'm not saying this properly. So omnibus bills are more or less a garbage can.
It's been described by others to me as that. I didn't really understand what it could possibly be till I was there, because I've heard the word, but how does this work? And it was an interesting thing to watch the process, because how it works is there's many bills that are passed along the way or don't pass along the way. And then when the omnibus comes, they might put several topics, energy and environment together. Different items, different issues, but they roll it all into one. So when you're voting, you're either voting yes for everything or no to everything, even though you might have voted yes on individual bills that are within the bill. And that was true for me. There were many things I voted yes for along the way as individual bills, but when it all got wrapped in, or we went to conference committee, and the major things to this area, like the energy, environment, things like that had no representation from the Republican side at the table at the conference committee, and then things were added in, or things that we had voted on the House floor were taken out, where we had already made a vote, which made it hard to vote yes. And so that's how the process went.
Well, do you know the statute that talks about omnibus bills being one
One bill?
bill, one
Yes.
issue,
Right.
one issue within that bill?
And they did a lot of one issues, and that was what it was interesting to me. And I thought if they could do it for cannabis and they could do it for the PRO Act for abortion, that was the first House File 1 that went through. They did single ticket items on abortion, on cannabis, the marijuana bill. They did it when they wanted to do it, but they didn't do it. And I think that it should be single ticket. You should be able to run the discussion through and vet it to the degree it should. Paid family medical leave was another one that went that way as a single topic. And I think that Minnesotans want that. They don't want everything wrapped in. The omnibus bills, when I was reading them, they were over 400 pages. And so you're looking through and you're making your checks. I would put positive, negative, positive, negative. What are the short-term consequences and the positive and the negative? And what are the long-term positive and negative? Because the unintended consequences are just as important. They call it money in the tails. And what that means is that it's expected expenses and costs to the taxpayer in years to come, but there's not going to be a funding stream. And if the funding doesn't match, it's going to be kicking the can down the road to whoever's in office to make really tough decisions. And that's what I think this year was a lot about. It's easy to say yes to everything when you have a 20 billion nearly budget surplus to start with. But it really was a false security in my mind, because when you govern that way and you spend everything and you use it in the sense that right now we're going to go on a spending spree, it's like giving people just a credit card and say, do whatever you want. And that's just not long-term success. And history shows it's not. So you have to have personal restraint, and there was zero personal restraint this year. That's what I saw.
Well, that is a nice beginning to some of the questions that I'm sure other people have. And so the topics you suggested we talk about, education, returning to phonics. Do you want to explain why you suggested that as a topic?
As a citizen who grew up with a middle school principal and public school superintendent, I was very shocked when I looked at the scorecards that we have for how we rank Minnesota children and how many children cannot read at grade level. I was absolutely shocked. I've spent my life caring for seniors, so I haven't really spent time thinking about what's happening. My kids have went through school. They did fine. They can read. And I thought, what's happened? I mean, what has happened? And when I looked at the years, it was dropping in reading and math and science, basic core knowledge classes before COVID happened. So it wasn't just let's just dump it all on the COVID thing. But COVID certainly made it worse, without a doubt, because we had kids learning remotely, and school is much more than just learning academically. It's the social skills, the mental health issues, and we're seeing all that, the fruits of that happen, and just the problems that happen when you are isolated and children are isolated. They become delayed. So the phonics of reading is really going back to what we learned in the 80s. We went to school in the 70s and 80s, and people before us, that was the style that it was called the science of reading, and you learn by phonetics, sounding out words. They got rid of that, and somebody came up with some sexy new way of doing it, whole words and all kinds of other things, and I've looked at it. The reality is, it doesn't matter to me what the method is. It isn't about this person's right, this is Democrat, this is Republican. This should be the most bipartisan thing we do, because if a child can't read, it is the greatest discrimination we could ever do for a child. Regardless, this is for every race, gender, your sex, it doesn't matter. None of that matters, because if you can't read, you are limited with your opportunities. You can't read the directions if you go work at Quick Trip, Dairy Queen, assisted livings, nursing homes, what we call entry-level jobs. You can't read the directions. You could have a safety issue. You could be terminated for job performance because you can't read. You could be checking a checklist just to get it done, but you don't understand what you're doing. So my position has been, we need to make sure kids can read. and return to what we know worked, because sometimes you don't have to change something just because there's some ideas are great, and I love thinking of new ways to do things better. But sometimes the problem isn't, we can't create another problem just by changing it. And if the science of reading was the best way children learned still today, then let's bring it back. And I think sometimes people's egos just get in the way. We said we were going to do this. Instead of just saying it didn't work, let's deviate and move it so that it's all about the kids. And it's not the teacher's fault. The teacher, I looked at the teacher prep for, classroom learning that they do. They have prep for teachers, and they aren't teaching phonics for the teachers anymore. They got rid of that. They have modules they have to do for student teaching, and they're not doing phonics in many of them the way that it used to be. So teachers are not prepared for it. They don't know it. When we proposed on the Republican side, we proposed the same budget, $2.2 billion, but we proposed $250 million into the science of reading to get new curriculum, to get the books in the school, to get mentoring, to get tutoring for kids, to get them caught up so they can read at grade level. The Republicans the Democrats said no, and they only put under $50 million in, which is not enough for all of our school districts when we can see that kids are reading at 30 to 50% reading level. It's not the Minnesota Miracle when you can't read. So I think we have to get back to the basics, and people are understanding that. People that have went through school and are watching their kids, I've had people call me and say, I have to try something different. My kids can't read. And this is of every economics background. They're concerned, and they're asking what's happening. So people are kind of realizing the way we went to school and were taught to read isn't applicable necessarily today. And so I think we're doing a reading reset.
Well, I can tell you from my own experience, when I graduated in 1965, I had good teachers. Mm-hmm. There was discipline in the schools, and I think that's part of the problem, the distractions for the children that want to learn. When there's chaos in the classroom, that's part of the problem as well. But when I went to school, I had some phonics, but I also had See, Dick, and Jane Run. Mm-hmm. That is sight reading. It's never worked, mm-hmm. but it's all been a part of a plan to dumb down America.
Well,
and I will be perfectly frank.
Yeah.
Schools have been a big part of that, because I have information. I used to home educate. I have information from a variety of different places that's proven that this See, Dick, and Jane Run was the beginning of the end of kids being able to really understand reading. And then when my granddaughter, who's 17 now, when she first started school in kindergarten, she got a paperback book, and the folks were going out for the evening, and they said, Grandma, have Anya read for you. I won't waste my time on that, but I was shocked. They put a 3-syllable word in front of a kindergarten child and expected her to figure it out. That's what the reading system is all about. It needs a total overhaul.
And so I'm hoping that the Democrats are doing under 50 million. It's not going to be enough for the teachers to do what they need to do, because we need to change the curriculum, the books. In my opinion, the districts have been sold a bill of goods, literally. And book companies are making money, and a lot of people are making money, but it's not at the success of the children. So I like math. I like to look at what are the scores saying. It isn't personal. It's not the teacher's fault. It's not the district's fault. It's the Minnesota Department of Education's fault. We need to get back to acknowledging some parts of history worked and tweak it and make some changes. But the goal has to be, can kids read or not? And if they can't read, then there's nothing to argue about. We have to get back to common sense and teaching kids core knowledge that they need before they graduate. And you need to know how to read. You need to know how to read.
Absolutely.
Or it's going to limit, and it will keep you in poverty. There's probably no greater correlation to staying in poverty than not being able to read and not being able to further your education. And that's something that everybody agrees upon. So there shouldn't be any divisiveness on getting back to great scores for reading for Minnesota kids.
The nation.
And the nation, yes, yes.
I saw a lot of that when
And I was interested to see Mississippi was a very low state when they didn't do phonics, and they now have raised in the top 10 for the country because they implemented phonics wholeheartedly, and they invested and they gave the teachers what they needed. They did the teacher prep to prepare the teachers, and they also then supported them with the curriculum, the tutoring, and they raised the test scores. So that's the thing that we should have. That's what we need. And on the point of disciplinary, on conduct in schools, we have to have an assembly of order in schools. It has to be taught early. And right now in this last session, one of the things that people were surprised on is you cannot remove a child between kindergarten and third grade, elementary school, from the classroom. You can't expel them from school. The principal, the superintendent doesn't have jurisdiction to do that anymore. They want them in the classroom no matter what. So to your point, if a child is having disruptive behaviors that are going to put the rest of the learning at risk, at what point is the needs of one versus the needs of a whole being balanced? And I think that they missed the boat this session on that, and they took away the jurisdiction of the school district, the school board, the superintendent, the principal, the teachers. And I think time is going to tell. I hope I'm wrong. I hope everything goes great. But if a child's never had discipline in a reasonable way, I'm saying the appropriate to match what it is that the teachers are dealing with. What's going to happen if we do nothing from K through 3 and then they go to 4th grade? What's that going to be like for the 4th grade teachers? When the first time a child can be, addressed is in 4th grade. That is going to be really not fair to the child, because little issues, little problems, big children, big problems. So I think scope and severity is taught in the right ways, and I believe the teachers know how to do that. I believe the principals need to know how to do that, and so do the superintendents. And if there's an isolated issue, I think government has been really great at mandating everybody. There's one problem, one bad teacher, one bad nurse, one bad nursing assistant. Something happens, a doctor does something, whoever does it that's in a professional capacity or serving people, a police officer does something, they make blanket things for the entire career, and then they make a mandate, and this is going to be 100%, we're never going to allow this. And that's not the way society runs. You need to do critical thinking, and if something needs to be dealt with, you deal with the one person. You don't blanket the whole population. So, and I saw a lot of that at government, and I think that's what we need to work on this next session, is pulling away some of the mandates that just don't make any sense. Let people do their jobs. They went to school to be professionals and to serve in careers and to serve the public, and they need to be given not just the responsibility, but the authority to do their job. And if they're not doing their job, there's systems with human resources and leadership that you should be coaching and mentoring and then holding people accountable.
Makes sense to me.
Common sense, right? Let's make common sense common again, right? Wouldn't that be great?
Most people don't even know what we're talking about. Okay, public safety. What about this train to Duluth, 190 million plus, giving homeless youth defined as 18 to 25 up to $1,000 per month cash?
Well, it made me a little bit speechless, and that doesn't happen often. For those that know me, I have a lot of words that go around up here. But Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, I love the movie. It was a comedy, okay? This is not a comedy. When you have ridership in Minneapolis, St. Paul, I was there for 5 months. I talked to a lot of people, and people in their 20s and 30s and 40s, they're doing Uber. They do Lyft. They drive. They park. They're not doing the trains. And when I asked why, people were very poignant. They said, look, it's not safe. Why would I put myself at risk? Why? So my question was, why would we invest $190 million when we have not dealt with the horse, which is public safety? Public safety needs to be addressed. We need to prosecute the criminals that are going through the system appropriately to warrant the behavior. And if we're not going to do that, then we cannot put people at risk with assault and rape and drugs and all the other things that could happen and are happening in Minneapolis, St. Paul on the systems we have. And if the public doesn't feel safe, the model of build and they will come is not like Field of Dreams in baseball. These are TV movies. And Planes, Trains, and Automobiles was a great comedy, but I don't think the comedy is going to be for Duluth. And right now, on top of the train coming and 190 million, that's federal money then that we're locked into this deal with federal money. So it sounds so great, but sometimes if it's too good to be true, it is. And even though there will be construction jobs, there always is when you do this. What is the long-term survivorship of this? And the cost and the gap in funding for the transit system in Minneapolis-St. Paul, when you have ridership down at record lows, it's taxpayers are paying the bill. So it's another piece of saying, why? And then there's 4 stops from Minneapolis-St. Paul to Duluth. It's not going to take less time than driving from Duluth. It's not going to be super cheap to do it. So, people can take Groom transportation or landline, and I've done those things to get to the city if I didn't want to drive. And so those models are there for the same amount of time. And then if you get here, a lot of people want to go up the North Shore. If they come into Duluth, they're going up the North Shore and they want to see things, and they'll rent a car then. So a lot of people are just like, what is the point of this? Is there going to be day travel for jobs? This area is not booming for jobs. So then it comes back to, what are we doing for small businesses? What are we doing for the business environment to create job opportunities so that it would have made any sense? To me, it's a cart that's down the road. It was short-sighted thinking to do it right now. For 190 million for a train, and then they define youth, homeless youth, as 18 to 24. Everybody hires people at these ages. So when we're doing housing, and we did millions of dollars in homeless housing this year that went through, I wanted to see things where there was some accountability for financial planning classes, pathways with workforce development, things that if they're going to get cash per month as a homeless 18 to 24, they have to attend classes, they have to have accountability, they have checks and balances. And the answer was no. We're not doing any of that. And they're going to get the money if we determine they need it. So it has raised a lot of questions with a lot of people, because Duluth and St. Louis County is going to have the same program now that Minneapolis-St. Paul has. And we're going to have the expressway going between them. And the kids in Minneapolis-Duluth, or Minneapolis-St. Paul that are homeless, and the youth that are 18 to 24 in Duluth and St. Louis County that are homeless have access to this up to $1,000 cash per month for up to 2 years, plus, I don't know, $4,000 to get a car up front and whatever else. So people are just asking, how is this possible? When we have everybody looking for jobs and we want accountability. Welfare to work, Clinton did years ago. I don't see any initiatives that even mirror an image of that. And so when we have everybody asking for help wanted, it seemed to me personal responsibility and pathways to get people back into the workforce for stability, because they want stability. They want stability. And there are people that have had unfortunate situations, but then to give them the plan to get successful, for long-term success.
Well, and I think also I see something else here. They aren't educated, as we just got done talking about.
If you can't read, what are you going to do?
Exactly. So they are already defeated in their mindset because they don't have the tools to get a job.
No.
So they got to look to the government, which this is all part of the plan, the big plan, is you can take over a people that are uneducated. I remember hearing stories from those people getting out of Vietnam, getting away from the control over there. Those people that had to go into those camps, they had no hope of getting out of Vietnam. But the rich people that were educated, which they were killing, they kill the educated people, they just have the servitude people still available in these camps. So they were able to come to America and other countries because they were educated, they had money, they got out of that communist, socialist Marxism that's coming into America big and strong. That's what's happening to our country. If you don't have an educated people, you've got lockstep people that will follow the government.
Well, that's what was strange to
getting.
me, because I was hopeful, because the Democrats have always had the model that we are for education. And the governor was a teacher, and we have the governor, we have the attorney general, the Senate, the DFL trifecta with the House. One would have thought that with $20 billion, the number one priority would have been education with gaps in learning that are just glaring. It is no Minnesota miracle. And so the formula that they put together, Republicans wanted to do 5% the first year, 5% the second year. That's the model in education. The Democrats did 4% the first year, 2% the second year. We offered the same cross subsidy and $250 million for the science of reading, tutoring, getting kids up to par. And then the Democrats offered multiple mandates that are going to strip the 4% and 2%. So the teachers aren't going to see more teachers. They're not going to see more raises. They're not going to see the things that they thought would happen, stabilizing operations, because it's not going to be the reality the districts are going to face. And I think when you have the core pieces of society, public safety, education, healthcare, when those are the places people don't want to work, we have to ask why. We have to fix the government side too, which is one of the reasons I ran for office, is we need to have leaders that have a background. And I said from the beginning, I'm for term limits. Whether the people think I'm doing a great job, I'm going to only serve 5 terms if they want me there. I think you need to bring fresh ideas in. I guarantee you I will have used my best idea by 10 years. And, we need to have people that have worked in education, who have worked in business, who have worked as a police officer, who have worked in all the different capacities, to bring knowledge that's relevant, to make the best policies for today, taking the past and the present and being mindful of the future. Because if you just do everything you love and your idea without the implication of who's paying for this and how are we going to bring people to Minnesota to want to live here, and how do we compete with the other states? How are we taxed compared to other states? We have winter 8 months of the year, so people don't all come here for the weather. So we need to make sure that we are Midwestern values, Midwestern friendly for families, for businesses, for children. And so we have a lot of work to do, but I'm optimistic.
Well, I'm glad for your optimism. That's what keeps you in the fight, right?
Correct.
Okay. What about criminals released after 1/3 jail time, even when with rape and murder?
I think that was the most disturbing thing to me this session, is to listen to the majority party believe that we should give more benefits to the criminals and more get out of jail free passes, was the monopoly term it's being called, in such a tragic way, when society, it's the first time in my life I know somebody that was assaulted in the cities getting groceries in the parking lot. It's the first time in my life I know 2 people whose cars were stolen by kids and trashed. This never was happening before. And you look at the rap sheets of these people and they're long. So I think people are tired of hearing about all of it. They feel like we're one human race in Minnesota, and if you commit a crime, there should be consequences. I think people are just done talking about all the rest of it, because their families are in jeopardy. Their kids going to college are in jeopardy. Their kids in poor communities everybody's at the same risk for rape, murder, homicide, all these things. And so if we're going to talk about what's best for the kids, we got to talk about prosecuting criminals. We have 1,700 stolen guns in 2021. They're not doing background checks. They're not doing them. So they're getting guns. The police officer that was shot in Wisconsin, that man had a rap sheet in Minnesota. He got out of prison early. I think he was sentenced to 6 years. When I looked at it, I believe he served 2 years in jail on probation. He had a gun in his house. I don't believe we're searching those felons' houses to make sure they don't have guns. And so we're not doing what we could be doing to protect people, all people, police officers, sheriffs, making sure that we're making their job not harder, but we're actually taking care of the laws we have in place. And that system is just broke down. Right now, judges are sentencing people for under what the guidelines allow, and then once they sentence them, there's plea bargaining and deals, and it's not the low-level misdemeanor things. We're talking murder, rape. And so I voted no, for the public safety bill. There was some things in it I voted yes for individually, but when it was packaged together with letting criminals, the most violent offenders for our children and for our people, out, there's no way I could sleep at night and vote yes for that. That is the definition of insanity in my mind. And when I was door knocking, I met the parents of Paul Antonich, and that kid is stamped in my mind. He would be 17. He wouldn't be 17. He would be older. That he was killed at 17.
Yeah.
Because he was murdered in the 90s, and around my children's
Central entrance here in Duluth.
And brutally murdered.
Yes.
And to think that any of that could happen, and anybody could be out of jail and not pay a penalty, and people that have had felonies and people who are prosecuted and go on to probation, if they're not in jail, they can now vote. They don't have to complete their whole sentence. They get to vote now. And there's just, to me, it was a really disservice to the victims. And I realize we want people to be successful back into society, but they put money in for art programs in prisons. And that's what we saw this session. It was, to me, a very demoralizing thing for victims, the families, and the suffering that goes on. And I think if you lost your child, or you lost your spouse, or you lost a friend and family member in some of these horrific ways, you would feel the same way. Absolutely. So yes, it's disappointing. And we were able, as Republicans, to get the carjacking to have penalties that warrant what the crime is, and to have fentanyl have penalties like heroin. So those were two good things that happened in the public safety bill. But the whole thing of not dealing with crime for what crime is, to me, was disturbing, really disturbing, because it's affecting the fabric of society. And it's not just it's not big cities. It's out in the suburbs. It's up here in Duluth. You look at, I watched Minneapolis Crime Watch all the time, and Minnesota Crime Watch, and you look at those rap sheets and the records, and it's happening across the whole state. So we need to call it what it is, and then make sure that we're supporting our police, and we're giving training, and we're doing the things that we need to do to keep people safe.
Well, and something else about felons voting, that's going to affect the outcome of elections when you have all kinds of criminals who are probably being paid to vote a certain way. Who knows? But I wouldn't surprise me.
And I'm all for people voting when they've completed their sentence.
Right.
But when you haven't completed your sentence, then that's one of the rights you lose when you commit a crime. That's how we set up society. So I think right now there's a tilt of our rights versus our responsibilities as a civilized society. And I really believe in just listening to people, really, from Democrats, Republicans, and independents. People are seeing that, and they want it back here. They don't like this tilt where everybody's rights supersede the needs of the whole, or a civilized society. And it doesn't matter if it's the classroom, business, when you're out in the public at the lake or the parks. They expect civilized society. And the definition of that, we need to get back to. So,
and we could go on about that.
We could.
We'll
keep on going.
We'll keep on going here. Yes. So, supposedly, I don't even remember what the first figure was now. Supposedly, we had a 17.9 billion. You just mentioned earlier 20 billion. How did we find another 3 billion to put on there? Where did all of these billions come from when you figure the COVID shut down businesses, people lost income, like my son's friend, he lost his apartment building because he couldn't force them to pay the rent during COVID.
Right.
So there's a variety of loss of businesses throughout the whole state of Minnesota. All they do is keep on piling on fees and what have you. So where did that 20 billion come from?
That's a very good question. And so some will say it was 17.5, 19, 20. It's in that gap in there for sure. And about 12.5 billion was from COVID money. So it was federal money coming into the state coffers. So it's really one-time money. And then the difference you can, whatever, 7 billion, somewhere in there, is extra revenue. And so when you look at it, though, you have to look at how many people have left Minnesota in the last year. And the policies that we put in place this year right now, we are going to be the highest tax bracket in the 50 states, I believe, for corporations. So we increased the tax brackets for that. So you have to look at where's the money going to be coming from when we've taxed more, and who is going to be paying the taxes. It's the middle income people that are going to get squeezed the most. They're not getting helped. The low income people are being helped, and they're going to get helped more. And then it's the taxation, and then how many people are going to stay in the model, what will happen with businesses, the business revenue that comes in. And to your point on revenue and how that works, one of my greatest issues this session was we grew government 40% in spending. We created 3 new agencies in the government, hundreds of FTEs in government budgeted staff.
FTEs?
Yeah.
What is that?
Full-time equivalent, so
Okay.
a full-time employee. They're going to work 2,080 hours a year. At a time when businesses can't find employees and the state agencies still can't either, so we're adding more. And it's money that there should be consolidation. When you have computerization that we have today, we should be getting the money into computerization and consolidating and networking so we have efficiencies in government instead of the consistency of inefficiencies. And then we have nonprofits. We grew the amount of money we're giving to nonprofits through the charts. So nonprofits and government agencies do not pay taxes. So when you grow that side of the, you have a pie. If that pie becomes tilted where it's a large amount of government employees and a large amount or an increase in the nonprofit section, both are important pieces of our society, but when they're tilted so far one way, it's going to be off the backs of the taxpayers. So the saying I heard a lot is, I have your back. I'm a Democrat, I have your back. We have your back, we're in this together. But what does that mean? Because if we don't have enough people paying taxes, it's off your back. It's gonna be on your back. It's breaking your back, literally. Because you're not gonna have enough people to go to keep increasing the fees. Whether it's the school district issues, the county issues, the property tax, all of the list will keep going because there's only so many people in Minnesota that are paying taxes. And if the businesses don't grow, that comes back to the taxpayer, the individual taxpayer. So we need to have business because the businesses are who pay taxes for the public schools, for the road and bridge, for the public safety. So we have school resource officers and we have public police officers and sheriffs and the whole thing. That's essential. It's an essential pillar in our community. And when we don't have it, people will notice it because their taxes will go up because there's no other options unless you cut programs. And so taking away, and that's that was the warning this year, the flashing yellow light on a stop sign or a stoplight. You have red and they just went full green. Just spend it all and let's spend more and get all the programs we've ever thought of and wanted in place. And they might be great programs, but there's a cost to every program. And so which things are we going to have to cut down the road? Time's going to tell.
So they spent plus 10 billion, 4.40% more.
Agreed. They spent a lot of money in a surplus. The surplus checks, the waltz checks that everybody campaigned on, that everybody expected when you have 17.5 billion or 20 billion, whatever number you say, you can look at how many taxpayers we had in Minnesota. You could have got a pretty big check. People said, the Democrats said, we need to give people $2,500. Republicans don't understand how important that is to the people. But when they got in power, they said, be happy with $250.
Yeah.
You're going to get $250 and smile. And people are really disappointed. Everybody I talk to says, what happened? You mean you had 20 billion or 17 billion? They don't even care what number it is. Billions. And you thought we only needed $250 as a taxpayer? And they're giving the $250 back to everybody, regardless if they paid taxes.
Yeah,
so you're going to get it even if you didn't pay taxes. It's like a stimulus check. Well, that's not what people expected when you had this much of a surplus. It was a record year. We've never had this in Minnesota. We've never had a record surplus. And now we're swinging from a record surplus to record spending. We've never had a government session increased spending by 40%. And that's what happened this year.
This is almost hard to swallow.
It is. And that's why I think, people are really starting to pay attention and ask questions, because, saying yes and doing what's everybody wants sometimes is not leadership, because leaders have to be willing to take the hit, to take the hard questions and make the hard decisions for the betterment of the long-term viability. We want Minnesota to thrive, not today, just today, but the next 5 years, the 10 years, for our kids, our grandkids, what people did. When I look at the sacrifices that the people made that I cared for that were 85 to 100, they would flip if they saw what happened this session. They would say, what are you thinking? Because you need to have a rainy day fund. You have to prepare. You're not always going to have great times. They grew up with no running water. They appreciated the basics. I think it's going to be a reality check for Minnesota. I really do. I think it's going to be an interesting session next session. And the 2024, we have 4 seats to take back the House in Minnesota. And I think it's going to be essential that if we have divided government, we can at least put some check and balances into it. And with what was passed this last year of just everything without vetting everything out in a timely fashion to make sure we've really looked into everything, I think it's going to be really important that we have divided government right now.
Well, as a senior citizen, and I'm sure there's many others out there, I hope there's many others listening, we're one of the few states that we have to pay twice on our Social Security. It's criminal.
I think it is.
And especially these people, we have a business, and so we have a decent and enough income. But there's many senior citizens that are living on the edge. And this state is taxing them on their Social Security. That's a double taxation.
And they got rid of the taxes up to a level. So I think it goes to $100,000 for individuals, or $78,000, something like that, for individuals, for that income tax, the Social Security tax will be eliminated. So they capped it, and then for couples it was $100,000. They capped it. But the point of it is that who's to say what's wealthy? Is $100,000 now wealthy? It's really not a lot of money. If you're working at Quick Trip, you're going to make $50,000. So people need to make $50,000, more than $50,000, to have any type of a life that they want to have. And so even with the child tax credit that happened, if you work at the grocery store, you make $17 an hour, you're going to be over. You're going to be over the $35,000, whether you're a single mom, you're married, whatever your situation is, a couple kids, you're not going to qualify for this child tax. $35,000 in earnings is nothing to have a child tax credit. So that's not helping people when you're working. I want initiatives that are going to help the working people get started to advance themselves so that they can, support themselves, start saving money, get ahead, and start being vital in society. And I think a lot of people are asking the same questions. So it's a philosophical difference. They don't believe the wealthy people, which is over 100,000, need to have Social Security tax elimination. My point is they already paid it. And if we don't address that, we're losing the people that have that pocket of money, and they're the volunteers. They're in our churches. They're the ones that are at Rotary. They're doing all the community events. They're donating to the charities. They're involved in the nonprofits. And when they leave, because they have choices, they don't have to be here. They're not raising kids anymore. And people are leaving. I have realtors that have called me and said they've never seen so many people put their houses up for sale. And they're asking them why, and they said the policies of Minnesota. We have to stop that. We have to stop that. And if we're not equal, then people have choices to say, you know what, I'm going to go to a different state. And they're not all leaving for weather. It's not all weather.
No, that's for sure.
So I think we need to eliminate we all said we were going to eliminate Social Security taxes for everybody. And so I think your word is your word or it's not. And it wasn't their word this session.
Well, we own a business, and I talk to a lot of people. They aren't just a customer. I engage them. And they like Minnesota summers. They don't like Minnesota winters.
Oh.
And they can't afford to live up here, so they are moving out. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty criminal when you think what a beautiful state we have. People just come up here from the Twin Cities because they get away from the maddening crowd. They have the beauty of the North Shore, and it is a wonderful place to live. So we are like strangling these older people out the door, so to speak, because they cannot afford to live here. They can't afford to keep their homes because of the taxes. And many of them are going back to work so they can just put food on the table. This is ridiculous. And yeah, you see these, now hiring. I don't think I go anywhere. Not hiring. Go
Or
back.
people say they're closed 1 or 2 days a week because they don't have staff. So
Right.
they're just operating fewer days a week. So we have jobs for anybody that wants to work in this state. And so we need to find ways to do it in a meaningful way.
Well, you're very well spoken, and you've had an excellent opportunity to give us a view of what's going on. I'm still processing a lot of this stuff, but for years, the education has been terrible, and I have seen the results of it. Education is, I think, the key in order to have a society of people that can think and reason.
And I think
But
that this,
without that, we have a innumerable number of problems. We have people in control that have an agenda, and they're shoving it down our throats. And some people are waking up, and some people are doing something about it. But I think it's going to take a whole lot more voices like yours that can get this thing under control. Mandates to cripple schools, counties, small businesses. Let's wrap it up with some more thoughts on that. You've already covered some of it.
you know, the mandate, one of the biggest ones was the family medical leave. We have a federal program called FMLA, which is Family Medical Leave Act, and that's 12 weeks. And it's this, the federal government says, look, as a business, you need to provide that if you have 50 employees or more. It can be paid or unpaid. You have to give them the time off, and if they have sick time and vacation time, they can use it. And so that's what I've been accustomed to when I had my kids, and most people are. And then some businesses, large businesses like, you know, Target and those big companies, they of course can do different things, but small businesses that are under 50 surely can't. And so right now the state of Minnesota, in their wisdom, said if you have one employee, you need to have paid Family Medical Leave Act for your employees. They can be off up to 20 weeks a year.
20.
20 weeks a year. So if you're want to take a medical leave, I'm having a child, I want to be, I'm the spouse or the partner, I want to be there as a paternity situation, that's leave. If they have surgery, their hernia out, all those things. Or if your mom's having knee surgery and you need to fly to Arizona or Texas or in this state, or you just met somebody at the grocery store that means as much to you as your sister, you can define that as family. And so there's very loose terms. And so employers are really upset that this got railroaded through with such a broad definition. And they modeled it thinking, well, people won't do it. They won't take the time. They'll take 6 weeks, 8 weeks. I don't think that's what's going to happen. And many people don't think that's going to happen. So I think the modeling of what they used for their assumptions are not right. The other states are seeing issues right now. And when you look at it, it seems like it's a railroad. It's just on a track of I don't know what's going to happen, but it doesn't sound promising to me. And so we said, let's let the private insurance market do this. Let's not do another state agency. Plus, they took $1.7 billion to create this new agency to manage it like the unemployment fund. So it's another government agency when we don't have we have fraud going on in government right now. We have no tracking systems that are monitoring all these things as we speak. And so why would we create another thing when the private market has short-term disability insurances and these things? So we came up with a plan to do that. The Republicans offered a plan to do that with Paid Family Medical Leave Act, to let the employers that have a better plan keep their plan, to let the employees do it, but to not mandate this for employees under 50. But they said no. So we're right now in a situation where a lot of these mandates, you know, for school districts and for counties and for small businesses, I don't think there is zero, we haven't even seen the actuary. Usually you have an actuary report done and they said, no, we're going to run this through before it's done. It's not even going to come to us. So we can't see the financial implications of this till October as legislative body. And they're doing it without knowledge of what the real repercussions for Minnesota is going to be. And for that reason, I voted no. The idea of it, I understand we need to do things for employees. Everybody wants to do that, but we have to do something that's going to work. And this model, I don't think was it.
Have you got a suggestion?
I think the suggestion is let the private market do it. They have it in place, and that was our suggestion and the amendments that we offered, and they said no. And I do believe the private sector should do this. Government should not be creating all these programs when we have private sector that can do it. You know, we need to do the core constitutional responsibilities, especially right now coming out of a pandemic, which is build businesses, make sure our roads don't have potholes from the top of the border to the bottom in east and west, and our roads, our bridges aren't collapsing. We have education where we are the Minnesota miracle with true test results that show it for public education, and we have quality health care, and we have enough workers to run 24-hour, and we have public safety. And if we don't have those four pillars solid, why would we take on creating new initiatives like we have all the knowledge and wisdom when there's entities that do that? And so, you know, for me, those are the things you don't get your hands involved in. The government doesn't need to do that. I think it's overreach, and we need to let the free market just do that and serve the people and guide it differently.
Well, we do have a few minutes left. You've covered a lot, but I just had one question as we were talking. So why was the government giving states billions of dollars for the COVID, and now we're using that for anything but COVID?
Well, that's a very good question, and that's why I'm very disappointed that $250 million of that COVID money didn't go back to the kids in a reading reset to get them to read, because that is the pathway for them to get out of poverty, the pathway for them to have a bright future, the pathway to have a Minnesota miracle. And the answer was no. And so if we're not going to invest in the kids, and then we're not going to take care of the seniors, we had to fight till the last day of session to get $300 million of this nearly $20 billion surplus for seniors and nursing homes that built this state. They weren't going to fund them. And they said, no, the rates are going to do it. Well, the Minnesota nursing home rates don't involve inflation. They're operating under rates that were from 2020. And so a lot has changed. Eggs, price of eggs, meat. You can't do your dietary budget with those costs. And the Minnesota State Department sets the rates for nursing homes. So nursing home administrators don't set the rates for private pay or medical assistance. It's rate equalization. So if you're private pay and you need the same level of care as me and I'm on medical assistance, we pay the same. The state sets all those rates. And they don't have inflationary adjustments in those rates. But they gave education, they gave every all the other departments in the state of Minnesota, they gave inflationary adjustments except nursing homes. So I said, look, it's obvious why we have a gap and why we have nursing homes closing across the state. We've lost 700 home daycare providers. We've lost numerous nursing homes. We only have 300 nursing homes left. And, you know, Ely was slated to close. A lot of these facilities, if they close, it's a huge anchor in the town. And families are driving in Minnesota winter roads hours because nursing homes are the only place that typically has 24-hour nurses besides the hospital. So I met with Essentia, St. Luke's, hospitals around the state and they said, we can't discharge anybody. We have kids waiting here, we have seniors waiting here, we need beds. We need care models. So we spent a lot of time back and forth, and finally on the last day of session, when we had to gavel out constitutionally, the House voted 134 unanimously for a single standalone bill for nursing homes. After the entire session, the Democrats voted no. And so the public rose up and said, this is not okay. We're not leaving session. I wanted to make sure disability groups were funded, that assisted livings were funded, that our vulnerable adults and our kids had funding. Vulnerable adults, kids, childcare, public safety. That's a role government should be playing. And creating an environment for small businesses to grow and flourish. It benefits everybody in society. So I think it's time to get back to the basics, and we're on our way. So people are getting educated, and that's one step in the right direction.
Let's hope so. Well, It's been fun having you in, Natalie. I got quite an education in just an hour. I would encourage you viewers to think about what Natalie has just got done saying. And you know, she can't do it alone. You can sit there and watch this on your television or your phone or whatever. But you know what? We all have to get involved and start speaking up because this affects every single person. So thank you for tuning in. This is Marcy Stromgren with Just the Facts, and having Natalie in the studio today has been a real educational experience.
And they can follow me on my website too.
Would you like to say?
Yeah, they can go on natalieforhouse.com. They can follow me when I'm out of session and see the parades and what's going on for events, and look forward to seeing you at all the community events and parades coming up.
Well, I hope you'll come back in the future.
I will. I will.
Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you. Have a great day.